Good evening.
How are you?
Let's try this again. Good evening. Thank you. For those of you who have not had the pleasure of meeting, I am Michael Dixon. I am the Director of Intercultural Services and Chief Diversity Officer here at Manchester University. And we want to welcome you to the 50th Annual Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Remembrance and Rededication Ceremony. This ceremony is especially special for us because we have taken a great deal to put together a program that we feel is going to be honoring Dr. King's legacy and things that he stood for. So tonight you're going to hear music, you'll hear praise, you'll hear words, you'll hear stories, all kinds of things that are all related to Dr. King and what he stood for here while he was with us here. Sorry. You will hear from 4 students, now alums, who were present when Dr. King was here in 1968. You will also hear songs that will uplift you. You hear songs that will make you think. Very similar in that praise. If you feel like you need to stand up and you feel a spirit move about you, please do so. If you want to sit and be pensive and think about how that word moves in your life, feel free to do so as well. We will have individuals who will come on stage and come off stage. There will be no formal presentations and introductions for those individuals that introduced themselves. And we will end with a final selection from the group that was just here on stage. So without further ado, I will at least introduce the first speaker, Myron Chenault, class of 1971.
Thank you. My name is Myron Chenault. I'm a 1971 graduate of Manchester College. I'm originally from Richmond, Indiana. I'm not quite sure why I was chosen to speak first. You know, I asked some of my friends, I told them about this program, and that somehow I got chosen to speak first, and there's all these excellent speakers, and why me? And one of them said to me, you know, Myron, they always save the best for last. Needless to say, he's no longer my friend. You know, when I was first invited to make some comments about my experiences 50 years ago today, I had mixed feelings about this opportunity. First, I had sadness. Why? Because I would much rather speak today about a man who was still among us and continued to be the beacon of hope, that there is a place for peace and love in this country and world. A man who would continue to remind those who call themselves Christians that Jesus Christ was a man who shunned wealth and material things and was there for those who were down or downtrodden, and that he was there to provide the boots so that they could pull themselves up by their bootstraps. On the other hand, I was happy because 50 years ago today was one of the most exciting days of my life. Imagine an 18-year-old African-American male from a medium-sized to small town in Indiana who had endured the cultural shock of being one of 6 African-American students on this campus of 1,500 plus. In fact, I used to tell my friends, there were more African-Americans sitting at my dinner table at home than there were here on this campus. As for that important day of February 1st, 1968, I remember I could see the auditorium from the window in my dorm room in Schwam Hall. A building that only the night before was lit and surrounded by people who I was later told some of them were federal agents who were used to determine if some scurrilous deviant had left some type of explosive device on this campus, which at the time, and I think it still does, prides itself in being a welcome retreat for those who are pacifists. Imagine that. But after all, this was 1968, where the hottest topics of discussion were war. The Vietnam War was still raging. In fact, the Tet Offensive, which was one of the largest offensives during that war, was launched the day before this presentation. Poverty. During this time in 1968, Medicare and Medicaid were created. And then there was the war on poverty, which, despite what the 45th president has said about his new tax plan, that war on poverty contributed to the lowest poverty level in the history of the United States. And that, my friends, is not fake news. The women's liberation movement. Yes, it gained some momentum then, and there has been some progress, yet we still have a long way to go, especially in pay equality and sexual harassment. And then in '68, there was also racism. What can I say about that, huh? They had to pass a law in 1968 called the Voting Rights Act, ensuring that blacks were not discriminated against by using mechanisms such as poll taxes, voting tests, numerous IDs. Voter IDs? Oh, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? You know, my family and friends are constantly asking me, what do I remember that Dr. King said on that day? And my response is this. He discussed the theory of light. He said, every man must decide whether we will walk in the light of creative altruism or in the darkness of destructive selfishness. You know, today it seems that everyone is consumed with the notion of what can you do for me? As students of a Christian pacifist school, you must repel that desire to be selfish, because that is not the way that Jesus taught us to be. He lectured us on science. Science investigates, religion interprets. Science gives man knowledge, which is power. Religion gives man wisdom, which is control. Science deals mainly with facts. Religion deals mainly with values. The two are not rivals. I also remember he lectured us on forgiveness. He said, we must develop and maintain the capacity to forgive. He who is devoid of the power to forgive is devoid of the power to love. There is some good in the worst of us and some evil in the best of us. When we discover this, we are less prone to hate our enemies. He lectured us on hate. He said, returning hate for hate multiplies hate, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Hate multiplies hate. Violence multiplies violence. And toughness multiplies toughness in a descending spiral of destruction. And he lectured us about passive acceptance. He stated, he who passively accepts evil is as much involved in it as he who helps to perpetrate it. He who accepts evil without protesting against it is really cooperating with it. You know what? If Dr. King were here today, he would tell you, put those smartphones down. Especially when you're with your friends. Because in his own words, people fail to get along because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. They don't know each other because they have not communicated with each other. Finally, as I sit down and leave you kind folks, there may be some of you in this crowd wondering what my feelings are today about Manchester. And I can say to you without reservation, I believe in this school and its mission. In fact, I have recommended it to friends as a place of higher learning that excels, especially in developing not only the intellect of the student, but also in development of their souls. Thank you for inviting me to speak. Remember, the time is always right to do the right thing. Thank you.
I am a 1970 graduate of Manchester College. It is indeed my honor and my pleasure. I praise God for the fact that I can be here with you tonight on this wonderful occasion. It just gives me great pleasure to see how much the college, now university, has evolved over the years. I appreciate so much the invitation to share with you just some reflections on that day in 1968. I need hours and hours and probably days to really tell you exactly how I feel, but I was told I only have 5 minutes, so I better stick with the program. It's etched so deeply in my memory that day that Dr. Hillman, who was president of the college at the time, called East Hall, and we didn't have cell phones back then, and they came to my room and said, "You have a call." I went to the phone, and the person said, "This is Dr. Hillman," and I said, "Yeah, right." I knew it was someone, a friend of mine, that was surely playing a trick on me. But after that brief silence, I knew that it was the president. He invited me to lunch, and my heart started racing, and it didn't stop, I think, until weeks later. Dr. King spoke to a full auditorium, just packed. I remember exactly where I sat in my assigned seat on the right-hand side of the room, near the back. The second seat over, I was dressed in an outfit that I had made myself. I wanted to look nice. I was going to meet the person that I felt was just the role model, the leader, the Christian man that was so passionate about his work. And I wanted to represent and represent well. You see, I was the only person of color, the only black, the only one in my class. There were only 6 black students on campus, and I just happened to be one of them. I felt like my heart was going to bounce right out of my chest. I was mesmerized. When he walked out on stage, I was totally surprised. I read so much about him. I had read articles and watched him on TV. And here this person was, a young man, a very young man, not very big, but big. He wasn't tall, but huge. I was just absolutely and positively overwhelmed. His 50-minute plus speech just was music to my ears. His cadence, his rhythmic cadence, his oral presentation was just another form of art. That ministerial Baptist configuration of words just held you in awe, and I was definitely in awe. He encouraged change and brought students' attention to racial issues of inequality that gained little traction here in this community or in communities throughout Indiana. I hung on every word. I was full just from listening to him talk. Having gone to segregated school for 3 years, I could understand what he was saying. I felt like he was talking to me. I could relate to everything that was going on. I remember that rejection and that fear that I felt that first day of school, going into the fourth grade in my small community, when the school first integrated. He talked about integration, and I thought, man, he must have been there. He must have known my heart. And then that summer, in my hometown of Madison, Indiana, the local pool, the community pool, was integrated. And I could just see myself swimming and floating on the water and having a ball. And my parents said, no, you're not going. And I thought, how? This is horrible. This is an opportunity. I get to go swim in the pool. And I just felt like they were being mean. But later that day, the words rang out in my small community that Paul Stephen Stewart was left to drown. My best friend's 7-year-old brother. Did anybody look and pay attention that he was laying on the bottom of the pool? Did anybody attempt to give him CPR? Did anybody attempt to help him? No. No. The days following were horrible. It went on for weeks and months. And integration, to me, brought back those memories that Dr. King talked about in his speech 50 years ago. That was 14 years after my friend's brother was left drowned. Following his speech, I can remember my hands just stinging from applauding. My arms hurt. I wanted to hear more. I longed to hear more. I can't even remember walking from the auditorium to the lunchroom. I just somehow magically got there and was at the table with him. My chest pounded. He was so human, so normal, so down to earth, so feeling, so giving, such a Christian man, so hardworking with so many ideas, and left no one out. He noticed everyone at the table. He talked to each one of us as if we were the only people in that room. Little did we know that on that very day that Echo Cole and Robert Walker, 2 garbage collectors in Memphis, Tennessee, were crushed to death by a malfunctioning garbage truck. They were sitting in the back of the truck because it was raining and were crushed. Dr. King left Manchester, went to Memphis, where he helped with the sanitation workers' strike. Then the night before his assassination in April, Dr. King told the group in Memphis what I believe he'd be telling us today. We've got to give ourselves to this struggle until the end. Nothing would be more tragic than to stop at this point. Yes, here it is today, 50 years later, and I'm telling you, we must continue to strive for economic equality and social justice. It's not an option. This day, this time, my 4 years here at Manchester, the opportunities afforded to me have indeed helped to mold me into the person that I am today. I'm continually reminded of Dr. King's words. He says, we can all do more. And this has inspired me over the years to be more involved, to be more engaged, to work at being a better person. But I have to say, my 4 years at Manchester encouraged the same type of ideas. The urgency is now. My being with him 50 years ago today was a clarion call for me to become more active and more involved with history and the history of a great nation. It's time for all of us to make every effort to make a difference. Thank you.
Good evening, Manchester. Good evening. There are more of you out there than that. Good evening, Manchester. Good evening. We're so glad to be here to celebrate this wonderful occasion with you. We are Chris Ford and Power of Praise from Fort Wayne, Indiana. I was telling, I think it was Derek or someone earlier, the big city of Fort Wayne. So we're glad to be here again to celebrate once again this fine occasion with all of you. And we're here to do some singing. And if you enjoyed that first selection, that was by Eric Coates. Why don't you put your hands together with me? We're going to hear some other fantastic singers tonight. And we're just, this next song we're going to do is called No One Else. And it just talks about how our God, the God that we serve and the God that lives in us, he's a jealous God, and he said that. And we, when we go to sing and give our praises and all honor and glory to him, we give it only to him because he alone is worthy of the praise. And as we're talking about Dr. King, we have to be sure and talk about the God that he loved and the God that he served and the God that lived in him. And I believe if he were standing here with us today, he would agree with us in this song that says, no one else receives the glory. Come on and clap your hands one more time. Come on, put your hands together right here, everybody. And if you feel like standing up and clapping, we don't mind.
No one else
we say it one more time, will you promise to help us say it? Will you promise to help us say it if we say it just one last time? Nobody's, I guess you're not going to help us say it. Anybody on this side to help us say it? I see a hand back there.
My name is Steve Stone. In 1968, I was the president of the student body here at Manchester University, and that's why I was invited to eat with Dr. King. I'm an ordained minister in the Church of the Brethren. I have been for 40 years, and I'm delighted to be here at this Brethren-affiliated institution. I first of all want to give my profound thanks to Manchester University. My memory goes way back because you have been here for 4 generations of my family. 4 generations of Stones have graduated from this college. Over 20 members of my extended family are alumni. I also want to thank President McFadden on an alumni trip to Alaska this summer. He gave us an update on current life, and I feel like although I haven't been around here in recent decades, that I do have current knowledge of life here at Manchester because of his presentation. I want to tell you 2 facts about my life because I want to make a point. Like some of you, I did not grow up encountering other cultures. I grew up in 2 all-Caucasian rural Indiana farm communities, one of which was right here in North Manchester. A second fact is that I currently serve on the board of the Black Church Coalition in Lexington, Kentucky. I share those 2 facts because I want to make the point that even if we grow up in a segregated neighborhood, we can decide tomorrow to become involved in race relations. I want to share a couple of historical facts. There are those who say in the current political climate, things haven't gotten better. And I want to remind you, obviously they're not students of Black history. They don't know how bad things have been in the past. If we go back far enough, people were rounded up in villages in Africa, placed on cargo ships. Many people died in transit while coming to the American, were put into slavery and treated as property, where rape and murder and whippings were part of everyday life. At one point in our country's history, there were over 3,500 lynchings. It is true that all people lynched were not people of color, but the vast majority were. When Dr. King spoke, people had been subjected to what were called the Jim Crow laws. People weren't allowed to eat in restaurants. They had to sit in the balcony of theaters. They had to go to the back of the bus. They had separate restrooms. They had separate water. And so I am reminded in a march that I was in, led by Dr. Martin Luther King Sr. in the mid-70s, after Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had died, my theme was, "We are overcoming." We have not yet achieved all that needs to be addressed, but to say things aren't better than they used to be isn't in touch. 2 final historical facts. I come from Lexington. One of the dubious distinctions of Lexington is it has what used to be the largest slave auction in the South. For those of you who are Hoosiers, do you know that one of your past governors and many of your legislators were members of the Ku Klux Klan? What I want to spend my time, the remainder of my time doing, I have been in I'm a chaplain and I'm a clergyman. I have been in prayer this whole academic year for Manchester. And I want to invite you to enter into prayer with me. I pray that the admissions personnel is in contact with African American and Hispanic youth in high school and junior college and encourages them to enroll here at Manchester. I pray that Manchester set and maintain a goal of 15% of African Americans. If they maintain that goal, that means that a sizable number of people who are students here will be entering into professions and be serving those now in junior high and in grade school. I pray that Manchester hire and recruit a percentage of coaches, faculty, and administrative staff, the same numbers that are there in the student body. That the faculty integrate black authors and writers into the syllabi of their curriculum. That Manchester include African American literature and black history and thereby enrich the curriculum. That Manchester continue to bring black artists and scholars to exhibit and speak at convocation. They have a long history. When I was here, I introduced Jesse Jackson to Convo. There's a long history of doing that. That Manchester continue to raise funds and help people underwrite their education, both poor white students and poor black students, so that a good liberal arts education is financially feasible. That the current emphasis here on Martin Luther King move in the hearts and minds of those in the student body so it affects not only them, but all of your future students, parishioners, patients, clients, and customers. That you continue to offer a junior year abroad so people can meet other cultures and people exercise that. I have a niece who's a graduate of here. She did an excellent job of taking advantage of that option. She went to Ghana. She went to Thailand. She went to Mexico. In Mexico, she met her husband. So now I have Hispanic relatives. She has 3 children by that union. And she developed a career. She teaches Spanish and teaches in the Indianapolis areas. It's amazing what overseas studies can do. That Caucasian students continue to meet the needs of their future minority clients with sensitivity and skill. That all students reflect on their culture, school years, youth organizations, and bring and meet the needs of others through organizations like Peace Corps and AmeriCorps. And that the Church of the Brethren, because of its decades of involvement in Nigeria, continue to work with EYN, the Church of the Brethren in Nigeria, and come in contact with college-ready youth and bring them to the States for study. Finally, I want to lead with this thought. I see racism more similar to cancer than it is to polio. If we were like polio, we could rejoice because the disease had been primarily eradicated from the earth. In cancer, we see significant breakthroughs each year, significant improvements, but the disease is still with us and challenges are there to be faced. Thank you.
Looks as if we good to be back on campus, although I'd rather be sitting beside you rather than up here. In 1969, President Hellman invited 4 students for lunch with Dr. Martin Luther King and Andrew Young. And I was one of the fortunate 4 to be seated right beside Andrew Young and right across the table from Dr. King. All 4 of us, including Myron, were much more timid than usual. They both teased us about that. Knowing we were in the presence of greatness was daunting. When I was 15, I had walked in the March on Washington with Church of the Brethren friends, and history has softened the portrayal of that event. In reality, the leaders in the movement faced danger, and they carried rugged responsibilities. Living with threats on their lives, on their families' lives, and heavy speaking schedules had to be extremely hard for leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and Andrew Young. And in that context, it was hard for them even to be at Manchester. I suspect during that time, it was also extremely hard for their wives and children. And so I am very proud that Manchester University will soon build the Jean Childs Young Intercultural Center. A wonderful decision. I confess that I don't remember specifically what Dr. King said about civil rights at that luncheon. What I do remember is that he listened and he asked questions. He laughed, and I think he actually relaxed. Dr. King wanted to know instead what we thought about racial issues in our own communities and on our campus. He wanted to know what we were doing to engage in honest and respectful discussions about ethics and responsibility. Dr. King's life lessons guided my entire life up to this day, and they undergirded my work at Manchester University. His lessons live on in the fabric of this school, and they are values that all citizens need to embrace, and I would say they need to embrace them especially now. Respect others across differences in race and background, religion, sexual orientation, family resources, and educational attainment. Learn nonviolent ways to resolve conflicts and then use those methods. Treat others the way you want to be treated. Create times and places to discuss race and social injustices, and do all you can to have a wide variety of people in those discussions. I told Myron that the quote he chose was the same quote I chose, because I believe that King's words still can change the world. Darkness, by darkness, discouragement, disillusionment, depression about what's going on. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. With deep faith and resounding eloquence, Dr. Martin Luther King helped drive out hate. And we must carry on his message in our communities today, tomorrow, and every day thereafter. Thanks for welcoming me back.
I'd like to thank all of you for joining us this evening, and particularly the 4 former students, Manchester graduates, who've returned to share their stories. For me, one of the iconic events of King's visit was that lunch that he had with students and faculty and staff. I can't imagine what it would have been like to have been here, but getting the chance to hear you reflect on your experiences has brought us into that experience of breaking bread with him. Now, you need to know that the iconic pictures of that lunch. For me, the memorable pictures of that visit are the pictures of that lunch. And I've seen it many, many times. It is outside my office in the hallway. And as a consequence, all of those who were involved, the students especially, are ageless. Right? They all live as they were in 1969 to me. And I was thinking about this in the immortal words of Bob Dylan, "You are forever young." Right? So I went back and I looked at the lyrics of that song, and they seem to have been written about each of you. May you grow up to be righteous. May you grow up to be true. May you always know the truth and see the lights surrounding you. May you always be courageous, stand upright, and be strong, and may you stay forever young. You are each, Sue and Steve, Myron and Joe, those things. Righteous, true, truthful, courageous, strong, upright, and forever young. We hope the same for our students today. Thank you for sharing with us. I'm delighted now to introduce Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III. Reverend Moss is senior pastor of Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago, Illinois. If you look at his official bio on the church website, you'll learn that he's been preaching for over 20 years, first at Tabernacle Baptist Church in Augusta, Georgia, and since 2008 at Trinity, the home church of President and Mrs. Obama when they're in Chicago. You'll find that he is a published author many times over and a preacher with a national reputation. You'll find that Dr. Moss graduated with honors from Morehouse College, with his Master of Divinity degree from Yale Divinity School, and with his Doctor of Ministry degree from Chicago Theological Seminary. And you'll read that he preaches and, more importantly, practices, quote, a black theology that unapologetically calls attention to the problems of mass incarceration, environmental justice, and economic inequality. Now, I had to go to that other definitive source of biographical information, Wikipedia, to learn that Dr. Moss was an NCAA All-American in track and field at Morehouse, and that he experienced his call to ministry during track practice. We had a chance to ask him about that tonight at dinner, and it was a great story. Dr. Moss counts as his mentors the work of Martin Luther King Jr. and his own father, Reverend Otis Moss Jr. You may remember that Reverend Moss Jr., a close colleague of both Dr. King and Dr. King's father, Martin Luther King Sr., spoke from this stage 2 years ago. And you know that Dr. King Jr. spoke from this very podium 50 years ago. That said, Dr. Moss's Manchester connections and his connections to the celebrations today are deeper than just following his father as a speaker here. I've learned that Jean Childs Young, our 1954 graduate after whom we've named the Intercultural Center, for which we broke ground today, was maid of honor in his parents' wedding and used to take care of him when he was a child. It is indeed a small world. Reverend Moss, welcome. We look forward to your preaching.
Take this opportunity to thank Dr. McFadden, to all of the faculty, the trustees, the staff here at Manchester. We thank you for your great work and witness. To those who gave wonderful reflections of their time here, where they had the opportunity to meet, without a doubt, probably the greatest prophet that America has ever produced, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And of course, the music ministry of Chris Ford and Power of Praise. Just absolutely tremendous. And I want to thank you for this moment and this opportunity as you all celebrate not only 50 years from the time period when Dr. King spoke from this podium, but also the work of Jean Childs Young, who was a great and amazing activist and sage in her own right. She was the one who really, in many ways, just was the educator for Andrew Young, became a close advisor of Dr. King in that inner circle And so it is just an honor to have the opportunity to be here as you all give celebration on commemoration of, again, one of the great national treasures that should be lifted up more in this nation, that being Jean Charles Young. And we thank you for the work that you are doing and continue to do. Now, I would like to, at this moment, because I am a minister, just to lift up a passage of Scripture that I believe would be helpful for us as we talk about the legacy and the work of not only Dr. King, but what we are all called to do collectively as a community. And I want to lift up a passage coming from the Gospel according to Mark in the 1st chapter. I want to give a couple of different translations, the NIV, that's the New International Version, but there is another translation entitled the OM3 translation. That's the Otis Moss III translation, and that will be out next year, edited by Dr. McFadden. We thank you very much. But it reads this way, coming from chapter 1 in the Gospel according to Mark. It reads this way, it's written, beginning with verse 2, it is written in the book of Isaiah, the prophet, I will send my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way, a voice of one calling in the desert. Prepare the way for the Lord, and make straight paths for him. And so John came baptizing in the desert. Another translation, John came baptizing in an area, a low-resource, economically depressed community, and preaching a baptism of repentance for forgiveness of sins. The whole Judean countryside, everybody from the country and the suburbs, and all those from Jerusalem, those from the city, went out to him, confessing their sins, and they were baptized by him in the Jordan. And John wore clothing made of camel's hair. Another translation, John wore organic clothing, with a leather belt tied around his waist, and ate locusts and wild honey. He ate organic also. And this was his message. After me will come another, more powerful than I, whose sandals I am not worthy to unlatch. I baptize you with water, but he will baptize you with the Holy Spirit. But this emphasis on this passage that says, I will send a messenger ahead of you, someone called to make a way for you. And for the next few moments, I would like to just deal with this idea that we are all called to make a way. We are all collectively called to make a way. As I stand here at this moment, this podium that at one time had one of the greatest prophets in America stand behind it, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It is interesting that 50 years after his assassination, in the words of a poet that was written in the book, The Inconvenient Hero, by Dr. Vincent Harding, the poet says this about Dr. King, that now that he is safely dead, let us build monuments to his name. Now that he is safely dead, let us lift up and honor him because he will disturb us no more. Now that he is safely dead. And as we come at this moment, may we not allow the sanitized version of Dr. King to rest upon our minds and upon our spirits. But to know that we lift up what the FBI stated was the most dangerous man in America. A radical prophet, a preacher who was raised in the South and nurtured and sipped from the great African-American black church tradition of resistance and commitment to community. And so we come here to talk about Dr. King, but I want to just raise a fundamental question for us, that we are all called to make a way. It is one of Dr. King's great teachers, a person by the name of Howard Thurman, who collected a group of writings from a woman by the name of Olive Schreiner. Olive Schreiner, who wrote the book, The Story of the African Farm, lived in South Africa at the turn of the century. She was a feminist before the term feminism had been created and was an anti-apartheid activist before the anti-apartheid movement. And what she did was that she took these collections of writings, and it was Howard Thurman who edited these writings. And in these writings, she had parables and poems and a variety of prose. And in one such story she told of her childhood in South Africa as she was studying, looking at a small brook. And at this small brook, she noticed that locusts were trying to come and go to the other side. And one locust would come, and then another would come, and they would be swept away by the current of the water. But eventually, more locusts came, and eventually they built a bridge to the other side. And it was the young Olive Schreiner who raised the question to an elder and said, "What of the locusts who first came and were washed away?" And the elder said to her that there are always people who make a track to the river's edge and will be heard of no more. It is because of them that we stand where we are today. Then one must always remember that you did not arrive at Manchester by yourself, but there was somebody who made a way for you. And it's very important that we recognize, especially in America, that we love to lift up those in history that we are familiar with, such as the great prophet, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who transformed the social landscape of America. And he is one that is worthy of being lifted up. But we also must lift up those who made a way before him. A person that many do not know in this space is a gentleman by the name of Reverend Vernon Johns. Reverend Vernon Johns, who grew up in Lynchburg, Virginia at the height of segregation in the 1920s, decided that he was going to go to college in a small school in Ohio known as Oberlin College. But he was from Lynchburg, Virginia during the period of segregation, and so what he decided to do was that he would apply to college. He would send off his application, and then he packed his bags to hop on the train because he wanted to arrive at the school the same time his application arrived. Because he believed that if you're going to deny me entrance to the school, deny me to my face. And so he showed up on the campus. Because he understood that as a person of color, that he did not go to school 9 months out of the year, but only 4 months out of the year. Because the rest of the time, he would spend time picking cotton, as was the tradition in Virginia. He arrived on the campus, made his way to the dean's office, told the dean, "I'm ready to start class." The dean, looking at this person who'd been kissed by nature's son, was quite confused and said to him, "Vernon, I found your application here, and we denied you because you don't have enough credits." Vernon Johns, with his quick wit, simply said, "Do you want somebody with brains or do you want somebody with credits? I don't have the credits, but I got the brains." And the dean was a little bit annoyed. He said, "Now, if you want to be a part of the school, you must be able to read Greek fluently." And so Vernon Johns scanned the bookcase of Dr. McFadden and then found a Greek book upon the bookcase of the dean, read it fluently, and then said to him, "Do you want somebody with brains or do you want somebody with credits?" The dean said, that was a cute trick. Now, you know you have to read Hebrew fluently. He did the same thing and read a book that was Hebrew fluently. And he said, "Do you want somebody with brains or credits?" And they allowed him to enter into Oberlin. He graduated from second in his class at Oberlin. And then after graduating, he was called to a small church in Montgomery, Alabama, known as Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. And in this small church, every Sunday, he would preach sermons that literally would cause the entire city to shake. I give you some of the titles of his sermons he preached in 1941. Is Heaven Segregated? In Montgomery, Alabama in 1941. He preached a sermon on one time entitled, "Is It Legal to Lynch Negroes in Alabama?" As a matter of fact, the sermon was so controversial that the police would show up on Saturday night and they saw what he was preaching and they arrested Vernon Johns for what he had not yet preached, but what he was going to preach. Now you've got to be a bad preacher to get the police to show up on Saturday night to find out what you're going to preach on Sunday morning. And so Vernon Johns was then taken into the sheriff's department, and there all the deputies with guns upon their hip, the sheriff asked him, "Vernon, tell us what you're going to preach on Sunday morning." And Vernon Johns, seeing all these men with guns quickly, with his wit move very quickly, he took his hat off and said, "I'd be more than happy to tell you what I'm going to preach on Sunday." And took his hat. He said, "But you must understand, I'm a Baptist preacher," and reached out his hat and said, "I must take an offering before I preach." At that moment, they laughed, and he got out of that situation. But then every Sunday at his church, he was always pushing the people, saying that we must change what is happening in Alabama. And eventually this bourgeois congregation put him out. They kicked him out of the church. And the deacons at that moment decided that they would never again have a radical preacher. And so what they did, they decided that they would vote and bring somebody in real young that they could mold and tell that person what they should do and how they should preach. And a deacon said, I know of a young man in Boston who just got his PhD, and they voted unanimously at that moment to call Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as their next preacher. If it had not been for Vernon Johns, there would be no Dr. Martin Luther King. There is always somebody whose shoulders we stand upon. And we must recognize that we are not where we are because of our own gifts, but we stand upon the shoulders of others. One could be excited about, the work and the wonderful stylings of a person by the name of Wynton Marsalis. But if you love the trumpet, you've got to also know a person by the name of Miles Davis, Dizzy Gillespie, and Louis Armstrong and Buddy Bolden. There's always somebody who you are standing on the shoulders of. Or maybe you love basketball. As I tell my son and daughter, it's nice to talk about LeBron and talk about Steph Curry, but please make sure you know a little bit about Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, and Larry Bird. You know a little bit about Dr. J, also Oscar Robertson, and Bill Russell. There's always somebody's shoulders you are standing on. And here you have this gentleman by the name of John the Baptist, who is not in the synagogue but is in the desert, and he recognizes that his entire ministry is to open the door for someone else. He is preparing the way for Jesus. He is in this desert area because he knows that he has been called to a low-resource community. What a ministry that John has. He says, I'm not called to the city. I'm not called to the suburbs. I'm called to an area where people do not have the economic resources. And there are enough people who have been called to make more money. There are enough people who have been called to say, look at me. But there is a calling that I believe the Spirit of God has across this land for those who recognize that we are called to do work for those who are the most vulnerable. That we have a desert assignment. You must recognize your desert assignment for those who are the most vulnerable. And when we do not recognize our calling for those who are most vulnerable, we end up utilizing rhetoric sometimes that seems to be haunting us from the Confederacy or the antebellum period in the South, where people will even refer to nations and people as quote-unquote manure holes. It's really strange to use such language about another nation, especially a nation such as Haiti. America owes a debt to Haiti. Why would I even say that? Well, I am a proud son of a city called Chicago. It was founded by a person by the name of Jean Dusable, who was a Haitian. There would be no Chicago if it hadn't been for a Haitian immigrant. But I do not stop there. When America was fighting against those British, the Redcoats, it was the Haitians who came to our aid and fought at our side. But also when Toussaint Louverture, when he had that revolution and defeated Napoleon and the French went into debt, $40 million debt, it was the French who had to get that debt off of their books. In order to get that debt off of their books, they had to sell a territory in America better known as the Louisiana Territory. And when they sold that territory, it was Haitian immigrants who made their way to New Orleans. As a result of going to New Orleans, they then mixed with those who were Spanish and German and French and Native American and created music that we know by the name of jazz. If there was no jazz, we wouldn't know Louis Armstrong. If we didn't know Louis Armstrong, you wouldn't know Dizzy Gillespie. If there was no Dizzy Gillespie, you wouldn't know Miles Davis. If there was no Miles Davis, you wouldn't know Trombone Shorty. If you didn't know Trombone Shorty, he wouldn't work with Kendrick Lamar. If he never worked with Kendrick Lamar, you would never hear Be Humble, Sit Down. And I'm so glad that we have a debt to Haiti. And we must recognize the assignment that we have for those who are most vulnerable. John was in the desert, working in the desert. But what I like about John is my man. John says, I'm not going to be like Jesus. I won't have multiple locations. I'm just little old John in the desert. In other words, John was satisfied with being John. I'm not going to try to be anybody else. And that is the word, if you remember nothing else that I say this evening, that you must recognize you are the best you can be. You don't need to be anybody else. It is better to live as an original than to die as a copy. Be who you have been called to be. No one can sing like you. No one can write like you. No one can pray like you. No one can do what you can do. You have been specifically gifted. Use your gifts and stop looking to the left or to the right and trying to be somebody else. Be who you are and who you've been called to be. John recognized that he was called in this great way. I'm going to be John. I'm going to work in the desert. I'm going to be in a low resource region because I am called to make a way for somebody else. That's almost all that I have to say, but I want to leave you with this simple thing, this simple idea that you, Manchester, are called to make a way for somebody else. If somebody assisted you in coming to this school, then you have a responsibility to open the door for somebody else. Don't slam the door. Open the door for somebody else. We are all called to make a way. It's best explained in this way. I was watching ESPN a few years ago, and there was a young man who was being interviewed by someone from ESPN. And the interviewer was rather upset with this football player. And he said to the football player, "I don't like your game." To paraphrase you, you celebrate too much when you get into the end zone. You're always taunting your opponent. And the football player simply said, "Obviously, sir, you've never played football. Because if you knew what I was doing, I'm not taunting my opponent. What I'm doing when I get into the end zone is I am thanking the people who blocked for me so that I could make it into the end zone. That when I make it to the space that I couldn't have done by myself, I have to turn around and say thank you to my tackle, and thank you to the guard, and thank you to the halfback, those who took the bruises that were intended for me, but I made it into the end zone. And sir, every time you see me in the end zone, I turn around and thank those on my team, but I always end by pointing upward, knowing that there's somebody else I have to thank. So I bid you good day. You need to thank your mothers, your fathers, your grandmothers, your grandfathers, those who made a way for you. But I simply say that sometimes you ought to, in the quietness of your room, just point upward and thank God for the possibilities in your life. Thank God for what God has done in your life. Make sure you block for somebody. Make sure that you are bruised for somebody. Somebody was bruised for you. Therefore, we must block for somebody else. Good day, Manchester. May God bless you and God keep you. But make sure that you know that we are called to make a way.
Oh, come on, keep clapping. Let's give Reverend Moss another good, God bless you, with our hand praise. Just told him if he had went probably another 60 seconds, my organist was going to get on the organ and keyboard and kind of play behind him. That's this little trick that they do in the African American church when the preacher gets to going real good. They'll make some noise like this on the keyboard. Yeah, that kind of stuff. Kind of revs them up a little bit. I said, Reverend, do you want to try it one more time? And they can, y'all want me to come back for a little bit? As we were back there and was enjoying what he had to say, I had gotten out my phone, and I said, let me see if I can find him. And I searched his name, and I just had to keep scrolling because there was so much to read about him. But Pastor, fantastic, and God bless you and your ministry, all the wonderful things that I read online about you. As we bring this wonderful evening to a close, we want to also thank Michael Dixon for inviting us to be here. Office of Multicultural Affairs, and to all of you, to the sound people who helped us at the onset of this before you got here to get things together. We thank you. And to all of you, thank you for being here this evening and celebrating a man that we all love and appreciate. And so why don't you give yourselves a hand real quick? That's right. Thank you. Couldn't have this without you. Now, we're going to end this event tonight. We're going to do a song that is pretty, should be pretty familiar to all of you. It's titled "We Shall Overcome." And we may have sung a version or two before, but we're going to do this version that's kind of sped up a little bit. It's got a little beat to it. So again, if you struggle with rhythm, just watch me and I'll keep you on beat. And we'll do a little bit of this song, and we'll go home this evening. Everybody right where you are, won't you stand to your feet, and we're going to do this together. Is that all right? Can we do this together? All right. Fantastic. Clap fast.
Manchester.